All right, today we are diving deep into an alternative history that, if true, would change everything we think we know about our past. We're going to explore the core claims behind the theory of the Tartarian Empire. We're talking about everything from bizarre architectural anomalies and maps of countries that don't exist anymore to incredible suppressed technologies. Proponents say it all points to one thing: a massive global cover-up. Our whole investigation really kicks off right here, with Memorial Hall in Philadelphia. Now, the official story is that this incredible ornate palace was built in just 18 months for a temporary World's Fair. But the theory starts with a really simple question. Does that really seem possible to you? Well, for believers in this theory, the answer is a hard no. They don't look at this and see a marvel of 19th century construction. They see a piece of evidence. A massive, silent witness to a history that they believe was deliberately erased and completely rewritten. And that brings us to the first part of this whole puzzle, a fundamental glitch, you could say, in the official story of how our cities were even built in the first place. So here's the fundamental problem. The official records say this building, with its huge 150-foot iron and glass dome and tons of perfectly carved stone, was finished in a year and a half. Using what? Horse-drawn carriages and hand tools? The theory fires back that this is basically an engineering impossibility. I mean, even with today's technology, cranes, laser cutting, the whole shebang, a project like this would take 5, maybe 10 years. So this huge discrepancy leads to the absolute central question of the entire theory. Were these grand Greco-Roman style buildings really put up by settlers and pioneers in brand new towns? You know, people who were just trying to survive? Or were they inherited? Were they just discovered, cleaned up, and then claimed by a new civilization? Okay, so if these buildings were inherited, then who were the original builders? Well, the theory proposes a pretty incredible answer: a forgotten global empire, one that was deliberately wiped from our maps and from our collective memory. The Empire of Tartaria. So the first layer of evidence comes from old maps. Take a look at this one. It's from 1570 by a very respected cartographer named Abraham Ortelius, and it shows this huge territory stretching across most of Asia, and it's clearly labeled Tartaria. I mean, this wasn't just some small region, it's shown as a massive, dominant power. And that map wasn't just a one-off thing. Here we are, over 200 years later, looking at a globe from the late 1700s. And what do we see? Grand Tartary. Again, shown as the largest country in the entire world, dwarfing all the nations of Europe. So this leads to a really key question. How does the biggest empire on Earth just vanish from history without a trace? Now, mainstream historians often dismiss Tartaria as just a vague catch-all term for a region they didn't know much about. But then, proponents of the theory point to something like this, an 1865 flag chart, which clearly shows a distinct flag for Tartary right alongside other nations. In fact, the 1771 Encyclopedia Britannica even described Tartaria as a vast country with its own government. That sounds a lot like a sovereign nation, doesn't it? But okay, if this global empire was real, with all of its magnificent architecture, the obvious question is, where did it all go? The theory's answer is as dramatic as it is simple. It was buried. This brings us to the mud flood hypothesis. It's the belief that some kind of global cataclysmic event, whether it was natural or man-made, who knows, submerged entire civilizations. The theory goes that this event buried the ground floors of Tartarian cities, and the survivors, well, they just built right on top of the ruins. Take a look at this historical photo. It shows the excavation of the Porta Nigra in Germany. I mean, just look at the fully formed architectural levels that are buried deep below what we now consider ground level. Proponents argue this isn't just gradual sediment building up over centuries. No, this is evidence of a rapid, catastrophic burial event. And it's not just something we see in the distant past. This here is a modern excavation. Notice the ornate, fully finished doors and windows, features that were clearly meant to be at ground level, but they're being found 10 to 15 feet below the modern sidewalk. So you have to ask, why would anyone build such detailed features only to immediately bury them? The theory argues they didn't. The ground level rose up around them. And the mud flood idea is often paired with another one, that the great fires of the 19th century in cities like Chicago and Seattle, maybe they weren't accidents. Maybe they were more like controlled demolitions, a way to clear the damaged upper levels of these Tartarian ruins and just make way for new construction, all while the buried truth remained hidden right under their feet. So why? Why go to all this trouble? Why execute what amounts to a global reset of history? Well, according to the theory, the motive was to hide the true purpose of the old world's architecture, a sophisticated free energy technology. And this is where the theory takes a really radical turn. It suggests that these grand structures left behind by Tartaria, the cathedrals, the Capitol buildings, the obelisks, they weren't just buildings. No, they were functional components of a planetary power grid. This comparison right here really highlights the kind of pattern recognition that fuels this whole theory. On the left, you've got a modern circuit board. On the right, the floor of a centuries-old cathedral. Theorists argue that the resemblance is just uncanny, and it suggests these ancient designs had a functional, energetic purpose that we just don't understand anymore. So from this point of view, every single architectural element had a job. The massive domes, often topped with metal, they acted as collectors for atmospheric electricity. Spires and obelisks, they were antennas. Those ornate rose windows were supposedly frequency filters. And get this, the massive pipe organs weren't just for music. They were harmonic generators that used sound vibration to create piezoelectric energy within the stone structure itself. The theory then proposes that these structures, which we call star forts, were the hardware that stabilized and distributed all this energy. Now, officially, they're military defenses, but proponents claim their perfect fractal geometry and the fact that they're found all over the globe points to a totally different function: massive energy resonators. Let's just take a quick tour. This is Neuf-Brissac in France. I mean, look at the absolute perfection of its octagonal symmetry. Theorists argue that its shape wasn't designed for deflecting cannonballs, but for resonating with a specific frequency, kind of like a giant tuning fork made of stone. And this design is global. This is Goryokaku in Japan, which is basically a carbon copy of the forts you find all across Europe. So the theory asks, why would a pretty secluded 19th century Japan suddenly build a complex European-style structure and call it a fort? And finally, Fort Jefferson in Florida. It's one of the largest masonry structures in the Americas, built on a tiny little island in the middle of the ocean. The logistical nightmare of its construction makes very little sense for a fort that never even saw a battle. But as an energetic node, drawing power from the surrounding saltwater, which acts as an electrolyte, well then its location suddenly becomes very, very strategic. So when you put all of these pieces together, the impossible architecture, the vanished empire, the mud flood, and the suppressed technology, you arrive at the theory's incredibly dramatic conclusion. And this leads us to the theory's ultimate claim, that history was deliberately reset. A technologically advanced civilization was destroyed and buried, and its knowledge of free energy was hidden from all of us. And the goal? To force humanity into a whole new paradigm of scarcity and control, one based on things like combustible fuels and metered electricity. And that leaves us with the final and most provocative question posed by this entire line of inquiry. You know, it's not really about whether you believe every single detail, but about questioning the narratives we've been given. Because if the official story has holes, if the very ground beneath our cities is hiding another layer of history, what else might we be missing?